Foundations. I love foundations. I got one in my backyard. As a matter of fact, I'm laying on my foundation right now, but I'm over them. So you know what's way cooler than foundations? What you build on top of them, like framing. Framing is the most exciting part of the build because it's when you go from a hunk of concrete in the ground to something that actually looks like a house. So it's here. It took about 3 times longer than it was supposed to get framed, but we passed inspection today and we're ready to roll. But before we get into that, I'm gonna break down how much this thing cost, labor, materials, exactly how long it took, and all the tips and tricks that we learned along the way. So this is the Schooner Dadu. It's one of the 10 pre-approved plans from the city of Seattle, and it's a fantastic first choice for your first build because there's already 150 of these already built in Seattle. So my framer, for example, literally just built this house last month. So they come in with experience, they know what to do, there's not a lot of gotchas, and yet there were still many things that I missed and goofed, and we're gonna get into those. So, is this enough intro? Can we actually start the video now?
No.
Yes, we're gonna get to the good stuff right now, which is how much did it cost? Well, let's just say it, $11,500 labor, $14,500 lumber. So about $25,500 altogether to get this thing framed. $25,000, that's a good amount of money. And yet in Seattle, that's actually a pretty tight budget to get 1,000 square feet framed. So let's break down that number a little bit. You know, first up, 11,500 of that is your framing contractor, and that's actually very low. Last house I did, I paid 15,500 for labor. So this contractor was a little bit more lower bid, and yet going with the lower bid meant that it took 3 times longer. So there's no free lunch. If you're gonna go for a cheaper contractor, you're oftentimes gonna end up paying for that another way, whether it's time, energy, management, etc. So how do you know if you have a good contractor? So once you get a bid, how do you evaluate it? The best thing you can do is ask for referrals. Like, I know this is tried and true, but just ask the contractor, can you give me a number for your last client? Or even better yet, can you give me an address for your last build? And then go over there, check out the build, see how they did, talk to their last client, see how they feel. And that'll give you so much more information than anything else you can do. Kind of one other tip on choosing a contractor is just right up front, if you call the contractor and they have staff, like they have an office, they're gonna be more expensive. For framing this sized house, you're gonna pay probably $3,000 to $5,000 more for a contractor who has staff versus one that doesn't. And that's just something you can kind of tack right on top. Let's break down the other big part of the expense here, which is lumber. In my case, that ran about $14,000 for lumber. One of the things you can do to reduce your cost is order the lumber yourself. So take your plan set, email it to a lumber yard or multiple lumber yards, get what they call a material takeoff list, and then get the bid from them. So they'll take that material takeoff list, and they'll give you a bid, and then you can compare against 2 or 3 lumber yards, and then order that direct, pay for it direct, and that'll end up saving you money. So those strategies of going with a contractor that requires a little more management, ordering the lumber yourself. So it's strategies like these that I used on my last build to bring my build costs lower than my architect even thought was possible. And it's just attention to detail, going after the lowest bid contractors you can find, and finding materials at the lowest possible cost. And the only thing it's gonna cost you is your sanity. So let's break down that lumber cost even more, because at $14,000, that's the most expensive component here. And we're gonna dive into 3 main things you can control. And the first up is beams. This thing right here is a parallelogram beam, and that puppy costs $1,000. Turns out, I didn't need it. I could have gone with a 6x12 dimensional beam, which would have been much cheaper. Because as you can see, this beam is supported in 3 places, and its span is not even that big. So it wasn't actually necessary to buy this $1,000 beam, but it's what the plans called for, and I wasn't exactly aware of how we were going to frame it, so $1,000 spent. But that's not all, because by ordering this beam in particular, it's not quite the correct dimension because these engineered beams are different sizes than dimensional lumber. So now I have additional issues above that I'll have to fix. So not only was it expensive, but it's gonna cost even more money to fix the issues that this particular beam caused. So beams are a big one. Make sure you review your plan set. Try to eliminate or reduce all the beams you have, especially if they're engineered, because those are gonna be very pricey.
All beams must be destroyed.
So it's not possible to catch every last thing, but kind of a tip or a trick you can use is to look at your material list, single out the most 2 or 3 expensive things, and then see if you can eliminate or reduce those. In this case, this beam was by far the most expensive single component, and that's where I should have been focusing my time and talking to my framer, talking to my builder friends about how I might reduce that. And next we're gonna go upstairs and talk about another very expensive part of building the house, which are trusses. So I opted for pre-manufactured trusses, which you can see above me. These are manufactured in a warehouse somewhere around here and then delivered on site. And it wasn't my first choice because trusses are expensive and they're complicated because they don't get delivered on time. There can be specification issues, and it's just overall more expensive and more complicated. So what's the alternative to trusses? Super easy, it's a hand-cut roof, which is actually my first preference, is to just hand-cut the roof on site, build it on site. But there was an issue, which is to do that with my plan set would require a civil engineer to stamp a new detail. That costs $1,200 minimum and will delay you for about 2 weeks. So I ended up opting for the pre-manufactured trusses because those were what were already approved. So up to this point, we've focused on saving money, but how do you know you have good value for money? Well, it's gonna be in the plan set. You're gonna have to know your plans inside and out. Like, that's your responsibility. No one else is gonna do it for you. Not the inspector, definitely not the contractor. So the first thing you're gonna wanna check is your windows and doors. So pull up your window order, pull up your plan set, pull out your tape measure, and check every dimension on every window while they build them. The number one thing framing contractors mess up is framing windows wrong. And I'm standing in front of one that was framed incorrectly, and the window below was framed incorrectly, and the window below that one was framed incorrectly. And if I didn't get out and check those and ask multiple times to get those reframed, they wouldn't have been reframed. And then my window contractors would have been complaining, and then I have to come out and fix it or pull the framing contractor back in. You're talking weeks delay, extra money. Just be on site with your tape measure, check everything, and make sure it matches what you see on the plan set. So the other thing that you definitely need to check is hardware. So this might look small, but this will be a big delay on your project if forgotten. Because the number one thing inspectors are looking for is the structural integrity of your build. And these little pieces of metal are crucial to that. So dig deep into your plan set, look at every little tiny call out, every detail. And if you don't know what's going on there, ask your framer just to remind him, because so often they forget, they get missed, the inspector calls it out, and voila, you have a week-long delay. So case in point right here, the devil's in the details, right? We've got an anchor that looks pretty innocuous, but in order to avoid a 10-day delay, David and I went to the store, pulled out a hammer drill, 2-foot-long masonry bit, and we drilled out new anchors for these that were missed during the concrete and were missed during the initial framing. So sometimes you gotta get your hands dirty to install all these tiny details because the inspector is definitely gonna be looking for them.
Okay. All right.
So as well prepared as I thought I was for this framing section, so much stuff went wrong. We got delayed, missing hardware, had to install hardware ourselves, all sorts of stuff, right? So the main takeaway for me here is know your plan set inside and out. Visualize how it's gonna go and ask yourself what questions arise when you're doing that. And then talk to your contractor, talk to your architect, talk to your lumberyard rep, and make a plan, and then be willing to get your hands dirty, because the best laid plans will be laid to ruin over the course of your project. no doubt. But if you're willing to get your hands dirty, that sweat equity is gonna pay off. Smoother build, lower costs, and ultimately that's gonna translate to higher profit and a better product for whoever buys or whoever lives in your house. Romans, countrymen, Seattle is in a housing crisis, and I call upon all of you, build houses, rise up and build housing for the people who so desperately need it.